A leopard asks a man for help, leaving him in panic. And the reason will make you cry non-stop. The dense forest canopy filtered the late afternoon sunlight, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. Jack Thornton, a seasoned forest ranger with weathered features and piercing green eyes, patrolled the outskirts of Whispering Pines National Park. His boots crunched softly on the leaf-strewn path as he scanned the surroundings, alert for any signs of disturbance. Suddenly, a rustle in the undergrowth caught his attention. Jack froze, his hand instinctively moving to the tranquilizer gun at his hip. Years of experience had taught him to expect the unexpected, but nothing could have prepared him for what emerged from the shadows. A magnificent leopard, its golden coat adorned with inky rosettes, padded silently into view. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he locked eyes with the majestic creature. But it wasn't the leopard's presence alone that stunned him. It was what the big cat carried gently in its mouth. Dangling from the leopard's jaws was a tiny, limp cub. Jack's mind raced. In all his years as a ranger, he had never witnessed such behavior. Leopards were notoriously elusive and fiercely protective of their young. For one to approach a human, let alone with its cub, was unheard of. The leopard took a few tentative steps forward, its amber eyes never leaving Jack's face. With each step, Jack's pulse quickened. He remained motionless, hardly daring to breathe. When the leopard was mere feet away, it slowly lowered its precious cargo to the ground. The cub lay still, its tiny chest barely rising and falling. Jack's trained eye could see that something was terribly wrong. The leopard nudged its offspring gently with its nose, then looked up at Jack with an almost imploring expression. In that moment, Jack understood. This mother leopard, driven by instinct and desperation, had sought out human help. It was a testament to the intelligence and adaptability of these incredible creatures, and it filled Jack with a sense of awe and responsibility. Keeping his movements slow and deliberate, Jack crouched down to examine the cub. The mother leopard tensed but didn't retreat. As Jack's fingers gently probed the cub's small body, he could feel the heat of fever and the rapid, irregular heartbeat. "It's okay, girl," he murmured softly to the mother. "I'm going to help your baby." As if understanding his words, the leopard took a step back, allowing Jack to scoop up the ailing cub. With the utmost care, he cradled the tiny creature against his chest. The mother leopard watched intently, her tail twitching with nervous energy. Jack knew he had to act fast. He reached for his radio, his voice urgent as he called for backup and veterinary assistance. As he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was the beginning of something extraordinary, a connection between man and nature that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the wild and his role in protecting it. Little did Jack know that this moment would set in motion a chain of events that would not only test his skills as a ranger, but also lead him to uncover a sinister plot threatening the delicate balance of the forest he had sworn to protect. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees, Jack began the careful journey back to the ranger station, the sick cub in his arms and the watchful mother leopard following close behind. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that a remarkable story was about to unfold within its leafy embrace. The ranger station bustled with frantic activity as Jack burst through the doors, the leopard cub cradled protectively against his chest. His colleagues, initially shocked by the sight, sprang into action at Jack's barked orders. "Call Dr. Elena Ramirez! Tell her it's an emergency!" Jack shouted, his voice echoing through the wooden building. Sarah Chen, a young ranger with a quick mind and quicker reflexes, was already on the phone, her fingers flying over the keypad. "Dr. Ramirez, we need you at the station immediately. It's a leopard cub. Condition critical." Jack laid the cub gently on an examination table, his calloused hands trembling slightly as he stroked its spotted fur. The tiny creature's breathing was labored, its eyes tightly shut against some invisible pain. "Hang in there, a little one," Jack murmured, a lump forming in his throat. He had seen countless animals in distress during his career, but something about this cub's plight touched him deeply. Perhaps it was the trust the mother leopard had placed in him, a trust he was desperate not to betray. Outside, a commotion arose as rangers attempted to keep the mother leopard at bay. She paced restlessly at the edge of the clearing, her powerful muscles rippling beneath her golden coat. Her eyes never left the station door, and her low rumbling growls sent shivers down the spines of even the most experienced rangers. "Jack," Sarah called from the doorway, "the mother won't leave. What should we do?" Jack's mind raced. He knew the dangers of allowing a wild predator so close to human habitation, but he also understood the depth of the mother's concern. In her eyes, he saw a reflection of his own worry for the cub. "Set up a perimeter, but don't tranquilize her unless absolutely necessary," he decided. "She's not here to harm anyone, she's just waiting." As if on cue, the sound of tires on gravel announced the arrival of Dr. Elena Ramirez. The veterinarian, a tall woman with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, hurried into the station with her medical bag in hand. "What have we got, Jack?" she asked, all business as she approached the examination table. Jack quickly recounted the strange encounter in the forest, watching anxiously as Elena examined the cub. Her face grew increasingly grave as she listened to its heart and checked its vital signs. "This isn't good," she murmured, reaching for her stethoscope. "The cub's symptoms, they're not consistent with any common illness I've seen in big cats." Jack's heart sank. "What are you thinking, Doc?" Elena's eyes met his, filled with concern. "I need to run some tests, but Jack, I'm worried this might be poisoning." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Poisoning. It implied intent, malice, a human hand behind the cub's suffering. Jack's mind whirled with the implications. If someone was deliberately harming the wildlife in Whispering Pines, it was more than just a tragedy, it was a crime. "Do whatever you need to do," Jack said firmly. "I'll inform the park authorities and start an investigation immediately." As Elena set to work, drawing blood samples and administering emergency treatment, Jack stepped outside to brief his team. The mother leopard's eyes locked onto him the moment he appeared, and he felt the weight of her gaze like a physical thing. "I promise you," he whispered, though he knew she couldn't understand his words, "I'll find out who did this. And I'll make it right." Inside the station, Elena worked tirelessly through the night, her skilled hands moving with precision as she fought to save the cub's life. Jack alternated between assisting her and coordinating with park officials, setting in motion a full-scale investigation into possible poaching or illegal hunting activities in the area. As dawn broke over the treetops, casting a pale golden light across the clearing, Jack stepped out once more to check on the mother leopard. To his surprise, she had been joined by two other adult leopards, their spotted coats gleaming in the early morning sun. They sat in a loose semicircle, watchful and wary, but making no aggressive moves. The sight filled Jack with a mixture of awe and unease. It was as if the entire leopard community had rallied around their sick member, entrusting its care to the humans they usually avoided at all costs. The weight of that trust settled on Jack's shoulders like a mantle. As he turned to go back inside, a flicker of movement caught his eye. There, at the edge of the tree line, stood a figure. For a brief moment, Jack thought he saw a man watching the scene unfold, his face hidden in shadow. But when he blinked, the figure was gone, leaving Jack to wonder if exhaustion was playing tricks on his mind. Little did he know that this fleeting glimpse was the first thread in a web of mystery and danger that would soon envelop him and the entire Whispering Pines community. As he re-entered the station, ready to face whatever challenges the new day might bring, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that forces beyond his understanding were at work in his beloved forest. The battle to save the leopard cub was just beginning, and with it, a journey that would test the limits of Jack's courage, compassion, and commitment to the wild world he had sworn to protect. The following days passed in a blur of activity and mounting tension. The leopard cub, whom the rangers had affectionately named Hope, clung to life by a thread. Dr. Elena Ramirez rarely left the makeshift veterinary unit, her dedication matched only by Jack's tireless efforts to uncover the truth behind Hope's mysterious illness. As Elena worked to stabilize the cub's condition, Jack ventured deep into the forest, his senses on high alert. The usual sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves now seemed ominous, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for a resolution to the unfolding drama. On the third day of his investigation, Jack made a chilling discovery. Hidden beneath a thick layer of fallen leaves and branches, he uncovered a series of small, inconspicuous devices. His heart raced as he carefully excavated one, revealing a primitive but effective chemical trap. "This is it," he muttered to himself, his voice tight with anger and disbelief. "This is what poisoned hope." Carefully collecting samples and documenting the location, Jack's mind raced with questions. Who would set such dangerous traps, and why? The use of chemical agents was not only cruel but illegal, threatening not just the targeted animals, but the entire ecosystem. As Jack prepared to radio in his findings, a twig snapped behind him. He whirled around, his hand instinctively moving to his hip. There, partially obscured by a gnarled oak, stood a man. His weathered face was partially hidden beneath the brim of a battered hat, but his eyes glinted with a mixture of surprise and something darker. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. "Hey," Jack called out, taking a step forward. "This is a restricted area. Identify yourself." The stranger hesitated for a moment, then turned and bolted into the dense undergrowth. Jack gave chase, his boots pounding against the forest floor as he pursued the fleeing figure. But the man seemed to know the terrain intimately, weaving through the trees with the ease of long familiarity. After several minutes of fruitless pursuit, Jack lost sight of the intruder. Breathing heavily, he leaned against a tree trunk, frustration and suspicion warring within him. Who was this mysterious man? And what was his connection to the chemical traps? Returning to the ranger station with his troubling findings, Jack was met with a mix of good and bad news. Hope's condition had stabilized somewhat under Elena's expert care, but the cub was still far from out of danger. Moreover, the presence of the mother leopard and her companions was beginning to attract attention, not all of it welcome. "Jack, we've got a problem," Sarah informed him as soon as he walked through the door. "Some locals are getting nervous about the leopards hanging around. There's talk of calling in hunters to take care of the problem." Jack's jaw clenched. "Absolutely not. These animals haven't shown any aggression. They're just worried about their cub. I know that, and you know that," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with frustration. "But fear makes people irrational. We need to do something to ease their concerns before this situation escalates." As if to underscore Sarah's point, a commotion erupted outside. Jack rushed to the window to see a group of men approaching the station, their faces set in grim determination. At their head was a familiar figure, Harold Blackwood, owner of the largest hunting lodge in the area. "Thornton," Blackwood's booming voice carried easily across the clearing, "we need to talk about these cats of yours." Jack took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation to come. He knew Blackwood well, a man who valued profit over preservation and who had long chafed against the restrictions placed on hunting in and around Whispering Pines. As Jack stepped out to meet the angry delegation, he couldn't shake the feeling that Blackwood's sudden interest in the leopards was more than mere coincidence. Could there be a connection between the hunting lodge owner and the mysterious traps in the forest? With the leopards watching silently from the tree line and tension thick in the air, Jack prepared to navigate the delicate balance between human fears and the needs of the wild. Little did he know that this confrontation would be the catalyst for a series of events that would shake the foundations of Whispering Pines and force him to question everything he thought he knew about the place he called home. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting harsh shadows across the faces of the assembled men, Jack squared his shoulders and stepped forward to meet whatever challenges lay ahead. The fate of Hope, the leopards, and perhaps the entire forest hung in the balance, and he was determined to see justice done, no matter the cost. The confrontation with Harold Blackwood and his supporters simmered with barely contained hostility. Jack stood his ground, his voice calm but firm as he addressed the group's concerns. "Gentlemen, I understand your worries, but I assure you, these leopards pose no threat to the community. They're here because their cub is sick." "Nothing more." Blackwood's face twisted into a sneer. "And how do you know that, Thornton? Since when did you become the leopard whisperer? These are wild animals, unpredictable and dangerous. They need to be removed before someone gets hurt." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Jack could see fear and anger in their eyes, emotions that could quickly turn a tense situation deadly. He needed to defuse this powder keg before it exploded. "Mr. Blackwood, I've been a ranger in these parts for over 2 decades. In all that time, we've never had a single incident of leopard aggression towards humans. These animals aren't here to cause trouble. Their mother's worried about their baby, just like any of us would be." A flicker of uncertainty passed over some faces in the crowd. Jack pressed his advantage. "We're working round the clock to treat the cub. Once it's well enough, the leopards will return to the deeper forest. All I'm asking is for a little patience and understanding." For a moment, it seemed as though Jack's words had struck a chord, but then Blackwood stepped forward, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, how touching. Thornton here wants us to sing Kumbaya with the kitty cats. Well, I've got news for you, Ranger. While you've been playing doctor to that cub, reports of livestock attacks have doubled. Coincidence? I think not." Jack frowned. This was the first he'd heard of any increase in attacks. "That's impossible. We monitor all reported incidents, and there's been no spike in leopard activity." "Are you calling me a liar?" Blackwood's face flushed red with anger. "I'm saying your information is incorrect," Jack replied evenly. "If there had been an increase in attacks, we would know about it." A tense silence fell over the group. Jack could see the conflict playing out on their faces, trust in their longtime ranger, warring with fear of the unknown threat the leopards seemingly represented. It was Sarah who broke the impasse. Stepping forward, she addressed the crowd. "Why don't we all take a step back and look at the facts? We can review the incident reports together transparently. If there truly is an increase in leopard activity, we'll take appropriate action. But if not, can we agree to give these animals the space and time they need?" Her calm, reasonable tone seemed to cool some of the heated emotions. Slowly, heads began to nod in agreement. Even Blackwood, though clearly unhappy, couldn't find a logical argument against the proposal. As the crowd began to disperse, Jack caught Blackwood's eye. The older man's gaze was cold, calculating. "This isn't over, Thornton," he growled softly. "One way or another, those cats are leaving. You'd do well to remember which side your bread is buttered on." With that cryptic warning, Blackwood turned and strode away, leaving Jack with a growing sense of unease. There was more going on here than a simple case of human-wildlife conflict. But what? Back inside the station, Jack shared his suspicions with Sarah and Elena. Blackwood's lying about the attacks, I'm sure of it. But why? What does he gain by stirring up fear against the leopards? Elena, taking a brief break from tending to Hope, frowned thoughtfully. "Could it be related to the chemical traps you found? If someone's trying to poach leopards, creating a climate of fear would make it easier to justify their actions." Sarah nodded, her fingers flying over her keyboard as she pulled up incident reports. "I've gone through every file for the past 6 months. There's been no increase in leopard attacks or sightings. Blackwood's claims are completely fabricated." Jack paced the small office, his mind racing. "We need to find out what Blackwood's really up to. Sarah, can you dig into his business dealings? See if there's been any unusual activity at the hunting lodge lately." "On it," Sarah replied, already immersed in her research. As night fell, Jack found himself unable to sleep, his thoughts churning with unanswered questions. He decided to take a walk, hoping the cool night air would clear his head. The forest was different at night, alive with the soft rustling of nocturnal creatures and the gentle whisper of wind through leaves. As Jack walked, he found himself drawn to the clearing where the leopards had made their temporary home. To his surprise, he wasn't alone. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, bathed in moonlight. As Jack approached, he recognized Dr. Elena Ramirez. "I couldn't sleep either," he asked softly, coming to stand beside her. Elena shook her head, her eyes fixed on the leopards. The mother lay curled protectively around her sleeping companions, her eyes gleaming in the darkness as she watched the humans. "I've been thinking about Hope," Elena said. "The poison used. It's not something commonly found in this area. It's specialized, expensive. Whoever set those traps knew exactly what they were doing." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "You think this goes beyond simple poaching?" Elena turned to face him, her expression grave. "I think we've stumbled onto something much bigger than we realized, Jack, and I'm worried about what might happen when we start digging deeper." As if in response to her words, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond the clearing. Both Jack and Eleanor tensed, peering into the shadows. For a moment, Jack thought he saw a flicker of movement, a shape darker than the surrounding night. But then it was gone, leaving him to wonder if it had been real or just a trick of his tired mind. "We should head back," he said, unable to shake the feeling that they were being watched. "It's not safe out here at night." As they walked back to the station, Jack's mind raced with possibilities. Who was behind the poisoned traps? What was Blackwood's role in all of this? And how far would their unknown enemies go to protect their secrets? Little did Jack know that the answers to these questions would shake the foundations of Whispering Pines and test the limits of his courage and conviction. As he bid Elena good night and retreated to his small quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the dawn that would bring with it new revelations and new dangers. In the darkness, unseen eyes watched and waited, biding their time for the perfect moment to strike. The next morning dawned grey and overcast, matching Jack's somber mood as he gathered his team for a briefing. Sarah's eyes were ringed with dark circles, evidence of a night spent combing through financial records and business dealings. "I've found something," she announced without preamble, her voice tight with tension. Blackwood's hunting lodge has been struggling financially for the past year, but 3 months ago, there was a sudden influx of cash. A lot of cash. Jack leaned forward. His interest piqued. "Source?" Sarah shook her head. "That's the thing. It's all routed through shell companies and offshore accounts. I can't trace it back to the original source, but it's definitely not legitimate business income." Elena. It was clear that the stakes were much higher than they had initially believed. Their grim musings were interrupted by a commotion outside. Jack rushed to the window to see a crowd gathering at the edge of the clearing. At its center stood Harold Blackwood, his face flushed with anger as he gesticulated wildly. "Thornton!" Blackwood's voice carried easily across the distance. "Get out here now. We've had enough of your excuses." Jack exchanged a quick glance with Sarah and Eleanor before stepping outside to face the mob. As he approached, he could see the fear and anger etched on the faces of the gathered townspeople. "What's going on, Harold?" Jack asked, keeping his voice calm and steady. Blackwood's eyes glittered with barely suppressed rage. "What's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. While you've been coddling those beasts, they've been terrorizing the town. 3 more livestock attacks last night, and this morning Mrs. Johnson found paw prints on her back porch. Paw prints. Thornton, these animals are getting bolder, and it's only a matter of time before someone gets hurt." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Jack could feel the situation slipping out of control. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a new voice cut through the tension. "So that's not possible." All eyes turned to see Elena striding purposefully towards them, a stack of papers clutched in her hand. She fixed Blackwood with a steely gaze. "I've been monitoring the Leopards constantly. They haven't left this clearing since they arrived. Whatever attacked the livestock, it wasn't them." Blackwood sneered. "And we're supposed to take your word for it. You're in Thornton's pocket, just like the rest of them." Elena's eyes flashed dangerously. "I'm a scientist, Mr. Blackwood. I deal in facts and not fear-mongering, and the facts say you're lying." A hush fell over the crowd as Elena's accusation hung in the air. Jack could see uncertainty creeping into the eyes of some of the townspeople. Blackwood, however, was far from cowed. "You're calling me a liar," he snarled, taking a menacing step towards Elena. Jack quickly intervened, placing himself between Blackwood and the veterinarian. "That's enough. Harold, we can easily verify these claims. If there have been attacks, there will be evidence. Why don't we all take a step back and investigate this properly?" For a moment, it seemed as though Blackwood might lash out physically. But then, abruptly, the fight seemed to go out of him. "Fine," he spat. "Investigate. But when you find those cats' fur at the scene, don't come crying to me." As Blackwood stormed off, The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving Jack, Elena, and Sarah standing alone in the clearing. The leopards watched silently from the tree line, their golden eyes unreadable. "That was too easy," Sarah murmured, voicing the suspicion they all felt. "Blackwood's up to something." Jack nodded grimly. "We need to find out what Sarah, I want you to keep digging into Blackwood's finances. Elena, can you stay here and keep an eye on Hope and the other leopards?" Elena nodded. "Of course, but what are you going to do?" Jack's eyes hardened with determination. "I'm going to check out these supposed attack sites. Something tells me we're going to find more than just paw prints." As Jack set off into the forest, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. But with the fate of the leopards and the entire Whispering Pines ecosystem hanging in the balance, he knew he had no choice but to press on. Little did he know that his investigation was about to uncover a conspiracy far more sinister than he could have imagined, one that would put not just the leopards, but his own life in grave danger. Jack moved swiftly through the forest, his senses on high alert as he approached the first of the reported attack sites. The morning mist clung to the undergrowth, giving the woods an ethereal, almost otherworldly quality. But Jack had no time to appreciate the beauty of his surroundings. He was on a mission. As he neared the Johnson farm, where the most recent leopard sighting had allegedly occurred, Jack's trained eye began to pick up on subtle inconsistencies. The ground was disturbed, yes, but not in the way a large predator would leave tracks. It was almost as if someone's been staging these attacks, Jack muttered to himself, crouching down to examine a set of prints more closely. They were leopard tracks, all right, but too perfect, too deliberately placed. No wild animal would leave such a clear trail. His suspicions deepening, Jack continued his investigation. At each reported attack site, he found similar evidence of tampering. Fake tracks, strategically placed tufts of fur, even a few chicken feathers scattered about for good measure. It was all too neat, too contrived. As Jack documented the falsified evidence with his camera, his mind raced. Who would go to such lengths to frame the leopards? And why? The obvious answer was Blackwood, but something about that didn't sit right. This level of deception required resources and planning beyond what the hunting lodge owner could muster on his own. Lost in thought, Jack almost missed the flash of movement in his peripheral vision. Almost. Years of working in the wilderness had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. He froze, every muscle tensed as he scanned his surroundings. There, partially hidden behind a gnarled oak, was a figure. The same weathered face he had glimpsed days ago when he first discovered the chemical traps. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then the stranger bolted, crashing through the underbrush with surprising speed. Jack gave chase, his heart pounding as he vaulted over fallen logs and ducked under low-hanging branches. The pursuit led him deeper into the forest, away from the well-traveled paths, and into territory even he, with all his experience, rarely ventured. Just as Jack thought he was gaining ground, his foot caught on an exposed root. He tumbled forward, landing hard on the forest floor. By the time he scrambled to his feet, the mysterious figure had vanished. Cursing under his breath, Jack took a moment to catch his breath and get his bearings. It was then that he noticed something odd about his surroundings. The trees here were different, older, more gnarled, with a presence that seemed to press in on him from all sides. Intrigued despite himself, Jack pressed forward. As he moved deeper into this unfamiliar part of the forest, the air grew thick with an otherworldly mist. Strange sounds echoed in the distance, calls of animals he couldn't identify, whispers that seemed to come from the trees themselves. And then, suddenly, he emerged into a clearing unlike anything he had ever seen in Whispering Pines. At its center stood an ancient, massive tree, its trunk easily 20 feet in diameter. Its branches reached towards the sky like grasping fingers, and its roots sprawled across the forest floor, creating a network of natural bridges and hollows. But it was what lay at the base of the tree that made Jack's breath catch in his throat. There, nestled among the roots, was a cave-like opening, and from within that dark maw came a soft, pulsing glow, a light that seemed to beat in time with the very heart of the forest. As Jack stood there, transfixed by the surreal scene before him, a voice spoke from behind him. nearly causing him to jump out of his skin. You weren't supposed to find this place. Jack whirled around to find himself face to face with the stranger he had been chasing. But now, standing in the ethereal light of the clearing, the man's features seemed to shift and change, as if he were not quite fully there. "Who are you?" Jack demanded, his hand instinctively moving to his hip, where his tranquilizer gun usually sat. But he had left it back at the station, not expecting to need it on what should have been a routine investigation. The stranger's lips curled into a sad smile. "I am the Keeper, guardian of the heart of Whispering Pines, and you, Jack Thornton, have stumbled upon a secret that was never meant for human eyes." Jack's mind reeled. Heart of Whispering Pines, Keeper. None of this made sense. And yet, standing in this impossible clearing, facing this enigmatic figure, he couldn't deny the magic that seemed to pulse in the very air around them. "What does this have to do with the leopards? With Blackwood?" Jack asked, struggling to connect the dots. The Keeper's expression darkened. "Everything. The balance of this forest hangs by a thread, and forces beyond your understanding seek to exploit its power. The leopards are but pawns in a game far larger than you can imagine." As the Keeper spoke, the mist in the clearing began to swirl and coalesce, forming shapes and scenes that played out before Jack's astonished eyes. He saw glimpses of ancient rituals, of battles fought in the shadowy depths of the forest, of creatures that defied description, and through it all he saw the leopards, guardians, protectors, their role in the forest's ecosystem far more crucial than he had ever realized. As the visions faded, the fate of Whispering Pines, and perhaps the world beyond, may rest in your hands. As Jack stood there, poised on the precipice of a decision that would change everything, he couldn't help but wonder, had he finally found the answer he had been seeking all along? Or had he stumbled into a web of secrets and magic that would ultimately destroy everything he held dear? The forest held its breath, waiting for his choice. "Jack Thornton, and I will show you what few mortals have ever seen." As they moved deeper into the heart of the ancient grove, the Keeper began to speak. His voice seemed to resonate with the very essence of the forest, each word carrying the weight of centuries. Whispering Pines is more than just a forest. It is a nexus, a place where the veils between worlds grow thin. The energy that flows through this place has attracted both protectors and those who would exploit its power for their own gain. The mist swirled around them, forming images that illustrated the Keeper's tale. Jack saw ancient tribes performing rituals beneath the sprawling branches of the great tree. He witnessed battles between forces of light and shadow, played out in the deepest recesses of the forest. "The leopards you've been protecting are descendants of the original guardians," the Keeper continued. "They are drawn to this place by an instinct older than time itself. But now, a new threat has emerged, one that seeks to harness the forest's power for dark purposes." The mist coalesced into a familiar face, Harold Blackwood. But there was something different about him, something twisted and corrupt that made Jack's skin crawl. "Blackwood is merely a puppet," the Keeper explained. "The true enemy is an ancient entity that feeds on fear and discord. It has been waiting, gathering strength, and now it sees an opportunity in the greed and ambition of men like Blackwood." Jack's mind raced as he connected the dots. The chemical traps, the fake attacks, it's all been a ploy to create fear and turn the town against the leopards. The Keeper nodded gravely. "Fear weakens the forest's natural defenses. If the leopards are driven out or killed, the balance will be disrupted, and the dark forces will have their chance to strike." As they reached the massive tree at the center of the grove, the Keeper turned to face Jack. "You now stand at a crossroads, Jack Thornton. The knowledge you have gained comes with a great responsibility. Will you take up the mantle of protector and fight for the true heart of Whispering Pines?" Jack looked up at the ancient tree, its branches seeming to reach out to him. He could feel the pulse of the forest, a rhythm that resonated with something deep within his own soul. In that moment, he knew there was only one choice he could make. "I will," he said, his voice firm with resolve. "But I can't do this alone. I need to warn Sarah and Elena, to prepare for what's coming." The Keeper's eyes glimmered with approval. "Your friends have roles to play in this as well. But beware, the enemy has eyes and ears everywhere. Trust must be given cautiously." As if to underscore the keeper's warning, a distant howl echoed through the trees, a sound filled with malice that made Jack's hair stand on end. "You must go now," the keeper said urgently, "and return to your world and set in motion the events that will determine the fate of Whispering Pines. But know this, the power to protect the forest lies not just in knowledge, but in the bonds between all living things. Remember this when the darkness seems overwhelming." With those cryptic words, the mist began to swirl around Jack, obscuring his vision. When it cleared, he found himself back on the main trail, the mystical grove nowhere in sight. But the weight of his newfound knowledge and responsibility sat heavy on his shoulders. Racing back to the ranger station, Jack's mind was a whirlwind of plans and strategies. He burst through the door, startling Sarah and Elena, who were huddled over a computer screen. "Jack, where have you been?" Elena exclaimed, worry etched on her face. "We've been trying to reach you for hours." "I've discovered something." "Incredible," Jack began, then hesitated, remembering the keeper's warning about trust. He looked at his friends, people he had worked alongside for years. Could he truly keep this secret from them? Taking a deep breath, he made his decision. "What I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, but I need you to listen with an open mind." Over the next hour, Jack recounted his experience in the mystical grove, watching as disbelief gave way to awe on his friends' faces. When he finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. It was Sarah who spoke first. "I always knew there was something special about this forest, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined." Eleanor nodded slowly, her scientific mind clearly struggling to reconcile what she had heard with her understanding of the world. It explained so much about the leopard's behavior, about the unique ecosystem here. "But Jack, if what you're saying is true, we're up against forces far beyond our understanding." "I know," Jack replied grimly, "but we have to try. The alternative is unthinkable." As they began to formulate a plan, a commotion outside drew their attention. Looking out the window, they saw a crowd gathering once again, with Harold Blackwood at its center. But this time, something was different. Blackwood's eyes seemed to glow with an unnatural light, and his voice carried a power that sent chills down Jack's spine. "The time has come to cleanse this forest of the beasts that threaten our safety," Blackwood bellowed, his words whipping the crowd into a frenzy. "Who will stand with me to protect our homes, our families?" Jack exchanged a worried glance with Sarah and Eleanor. The enemy was making its move, using Blackwood as its mouthpiece to turn the town against the forest and its guardians. "We need to act now," Jack said urgently. "Sarah, can you use your research to expose Blackwood's corruption? We need to undermine his credibility." Sarah nodded, determination glinting in her eyes. "I'm on it. I'll leak the financial records to every news outlet in the state if I have to." "Elena," Jack continued, "we need to prove that the leopards aren't behind the attacks. Can you gather evidence? Maybe use your veterinary expertise to show the inconsistencies." "Consider it done," Elena replied, already reaching for her medical bag. As his friends sprang into action, Jack steeled himself for the confrontation to come. He knew that exposing Blackwood was only the first step. The true battle would be fought in the shadows, against an enemy that most people wouldn't even believe existed. Outside, the crowd's angry shouts grew louder. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the clearing. As darkness fell, Jack could almost feel the malevolent presence gathering strength, preparing to make its move. But as he looked at Sarah and Elena, busy at their tasks, and thought of the ancient grove hidden deep in the forest, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. The keeper had said that the power to protect the forest lay in the bonds between all living things. Perhaps it was these connections, between humans, animals, and the land itself, that would ultimately turn the tide. With renewed determination, Jack stepped outside to face the gathering storm. The fate of Whispering Pines hung in the balance, and he was ready to fight for it, no matter the cost. The air crackled with tension as Jack stood on the steps of the ranger station, facing the angry mob led by Harold Blackwood. The setting sun cast long shadows across the clearing, and Jack could almost see tendrils of darkness coiling around Blackwood, feeding off the fear and anger of the crowd. "Thornton!" Blackwood's voice boomed, unnaturally loud in the gathering dusk. "Your time protecting these beasts is over. Step aside or be swept away with them." Jack took a deep breath, centering himself. He could feel the pulse of the forest behind him, lending him strength. "Listen to me, all of you," he began, his voice calm but carrying. "You're being deceived. The leopards aren't your enemy. They're protectors of this land, just as we all should be." A ripple of uncertainty passed through the crowd. Jack pressed on. "The attacks you've heard about, they're fabrications, created to manipulate you into destroying the very thing that keeps this town alive, our forest." "Lies," Blackwood snarled, but Jack could see doubt creeping into the eyes of some townspeople. At that moment, Sarah burst out of the station, a stack of papers in her hand. "I have proof," she shouted. "Financial records showing illegal transactions, bribes paid to fake witnesses. Blackwood's been orchestrating this whole thing." As Sarah began distributing copies of the damning evidence, Eleanor emerged with her own findings. "I've analyzed the supposed attack sites," she announced. "The tracks were faked, the evidence planted. No leopard was responsible for any of this." Murmurs of shock and anger rippled through the crowd, but this time directed at Blackwood. The hunting lodge owner's face contorted with rage, and for a moment, his eyes seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. "Fools!" he roared, his voice taking on an inhuman quality that made several people step back in fear. "You have no idea of the powers you're dealing with. This forest holds secrets beyond your puny imaginations, and I will claim them for myself." As if summoned by his words, an unnatural darkness began to spread from where Blackwood stood. Tendrils of shadow writhed and twisted, reaching out towards the stunned onlookers. Panic erupted as people began to flee, their angry shouts turning to cries of terror. Jack stood his ground, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it, the culmination of everything the Keeper had warned him about. The dark force that had been manipulating events was finally showing its true face. "Sarah, Elena," he called out, "get everyone to safety. I'll handle this." His friends hesitated for a moment, clearly reluctant to leave him alone. But another surge of darkness from Blackwood spurred them into action, and they began herding the terrified townspeople away from the clearing. Jack turned to face Blackwood, or rather, the entity that had taken control of him. The man's form was barely recognizable now, shrouded in roiling shadows that seemed to drink in the fading light. "You don't belong here," Jack said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "This forest is under my protection." A laugh like shattering glass erupted from the shadowy form. "Protection? You are but an insect compared to my power. I have waited centuries for this moment, and no mere mortal will stand in my way." A tendril of darkness lashed out, faster than Jack could react. It struck him in the chest, sending him flying backwards. He hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. As he struggled to his feet, he could feel the malevolent presence pressing in on him, seeking to crush his will. But then, just as despair threatened to overwhelm him, Jack felt something else, a warmth spreading through him, a connection to the living earth beneath his feet. He remembered the Keeper's words about the bonds between all living things, and suddenly, he understood. Closing his eyes, Jack reached out with his mind, not fighting the darkness, but rather seeking the light that he knew existed in every part of the forest. He felt the ancient trees, their roots delving deep into the earth. He sensed the myriad creatures that called this land home, from the tiniest insect to the majestic leopards. And there, pulsing at the heart of it all, was the life force of Whispering Pines itself, the power that the dark entity sought to corrupt and control. Jack opened himself to that power, not seeking to command it, but to become a conduit for its natural protective force. As he did, he felt energy surging through him, filling him with a light that pushed back against the encroaching shadows. His eyes snapped open, now glowing with an inner fire that matched the entity's own baleful glare. "You're right," Jack said, his voice resonating with the combined will of the forest. "I am just one mortal, but I am not alone." As if in response to his words, a chorus of howls and roars erupted from the forest. The leopards emerged from the tree line, their eyes shining with the same inner light as Jack's. Behind them came deer and foxes, birds and squirrels, a veritable army of woodland creatures united against the dark force. The shadowy entity recoiled, its confidence faltering for the first time. "Impossible," it hissed. "The forest cannot stand against me." "The forest has always stood against you," Jack replied, stepping forward. With each step, the ground beneath his feet seemed to glow, life and energy flowing up through him. "You just never understood its true power." Raising his hands, Jack channeled the combined force of whispering pines. A beam of pure, radiant energy burst forth, colliding with the dark entity. The clearing was filled with an otherworldly shriek as light and shadow clashed in a spectacular display. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the two forces remained locked in combat. Then, with a final, defiant roar, the entity's form began to unravel. Streams of darkness peeled away, dissipating into the night air until all that remained was Harold Blackwood, bewildered and shaken, but free from the malevolent influence that had controlled him. As the last vestiges of unnatural shadow faded, a hush fell over the clearing. Jack swayed on his feet, the enormous energy that had flowed through him leaving him drained but exhilarated. The leopards approached, rubbing against his legs in a gesture of solidarity and gratitude. Sarah and Elena rushed forward, embracing Jack tightly. "That was incredible," Elena breathed, her scientific mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. "It wasn't just me," Jack replied, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "It was all of us, the entire forest working together." As the adrenaline of the moment began to fade, Jack became aware of the gathered townspeople, watching in awe and confusion. He knew there would be questions, explanations needed, but he also knew that Whispering Pines would never be the same. The veil had been lifted, and the true nature of their home had been revealed. In the distance, Jack caught a glimpse of the keeper, nodding in approval before fading back into the misty depths of the forest. A sense of peace settled over him, a certainty that while challenges would undoubtedly lie ahead, the heart of Whispering Pines was safe. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, Jack looked out over the assembled creatures of the forest and the humans who called this land home. In that moment, he saw not division, but unity, a shared connection to the living, breathing entity that was Whispering Pines. The forest had weathered this storm, and it would face whatever came next as it always had, together.